It was the day after Christmas. The snow outside still untouched, the lights still twinkling. In a wealthy home, tucked in the hills of Boulder, Colorado, a family awoke to what should have been the warm afterglow of holiday joy. Instead, what followed was a nightmare so shocking, so deeply disturbing, it would grip the nation for decades. A 6-year-old beauty queen was found murdered in her own basement, and somehow, no one heard a sound. The note said she was taken, but her body never left the house. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey, a child who sparkled on stage, vanished in the shadows of her home, and whose death still haunts the American conscience nearly 30 years later. And yet, the closer you look, the more the truth slips through your fingers. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. Her name itself was a blend of legacy, JonBenét from her father's first and middle names JonBenét and Patricia from her mother Patsy Ramsey. She was born into wealth, privilege and beauty, 3 things that would eventually become intertwined with the tragedy that stole her future. By the time JonBenét was 6, she had already captured the eyes of pageant judges across Colorado. She wasn't just competing, she was winning. Titles like Little Miss Colorado, National Tiny Miss Beauty, and America's Royal Miss decorated her growing resume. She had the bright smile, the blonde curls, the perfect posture. But she was still just a little girl. A child playing dress-up in a world that would soon devour her innocence. The Ramseys had moved from Atlanta to Boulder, Colorado, where John served as president of Access Graphics, a successful computer company. They lived in a sprawling 7,000-square-foot home at 755 15th Street, just blocks away from the University of Colorado. From the outside, their life looked picturesque, a wealthy, loving family, community respected with 2 children, JonBenét and her older brother, Burke. But behind those grand windows and wreath-covered doors, something sinister waited. December 25, 1996, was a classic American Christmas in the Ramsey household. The family attended a holiday dinner at a friend's house. Home videos would later show JonBenét in a red dress, dancing and smiling, filled with the innocent joy only a 6-year-old could know. They returned home late that evening, and according to Patsy, JonBenét was fast asleep. Patsy carried her daughter upstairs and tucked her into bed. The house was quiet. The family went to sleep. But by morning, everything had changed. December 26, 1996, the ransom note. At approximately 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey made a frantic 911 call. Her voice was trembling, panicked. "We have a kidnapping! There's a note left and our daughter is gone!" Police arrived within minutes. On the staircase, they found a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note, one of the longest ever seen in a kidnapping case. It demanded $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus the year before. That strange coincidence would fuel theories for years. The note read like a movie script. "We are a small foreign faction. If you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions carefully." It warned the family not to contact the police, but Patsy had already called them. Despite the ransom-style message, police initially treated the situation as a kidnapping. Officers searched the home but failed to fully secure the scene. Friends were allowed inside, family moved around, touching things, offering comfort, and unknowingly contaminating potential evidence. Hours passed. There was no call from the so-called kidnappers, no follow-up, no attempt to collect the money, just silence. Then, shortly after 1 p.m., John Ramsey disappeared from the main level. He reappeared minutes later, carrying JonBenét's lifeless body in his arms, screaming as he laid her on the floor. She had been found in a small, windowless utility room in the basement. She was wearing a white nightgown. Her wrists were bound with nylon cord. A garrote made from the same cord and a broken paintbrush was twisted tightly around her neck. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. There were signs of sexual trauma, and yet no one in the house had heard her scream. The cause of death was ruled asphyxiation due to strangulation, associated with craniocerebral trauma, a fracture to the skull, likely from a blunt object, but she had not died instantly. Medical examiners believed the head trauma came first, and the garrote was used later, suggesting intentional killing, not an accident. What should have been an airtight crime scene turned into a chaotic mess. The police had failed to secure the entire house as a crime scene from the start. Family friends came and went. Evidence was moved, touched, destroyed. One officer even allowed John to search the house himself, which is when he found the body. No protocol, no gloves, just shock and raw emotion taking over. That failure would haunt the case forever. Key evidence was lost, footprints, fibers, DNA, disturbed before it could ever be collected properly. By the time forensic teams arrived, it was too late. In the days that followed, investigators collected what they could. One of the most critical findings: male DNA on JonBenét's underwear and the garrote, and it did not match anyone in the Ramsey family. That piece of evidence would become the cornerstone of one of the case's most enduring debates. If the killer wasn't someone in the house, then who had slipped in, murdered a child, and vanished without a trace? But not everyone was convinced the Ramseys were innocent. From the moment JonBenét's body was found, the case stopped being about what happened and became more about who was lying. The media turned the Ramsey mansion into a circus, while inside, a shattered family tried to explain what no one could believe. But, as investigators dug deeper, it became clear. The story didn't make sense. The timeline didn't match. The ransom note was too long, and the only people inside that house were JonBenét's family. By December 27th, just 24 hours after the discovery of JonBenét's body, news vans lined the quiet street outside the Ramsey home. The media, hungry for every detail, began dissecting every part of the case, especially the behavior of JonBenét's parents. Why hadn't they heard anything? Why was the note so elaborate? And why was John already making arrangements to fly to Atlanta the next day? Critics jumped on every inconsistency. Patsy's dramatic 911 call was played on loops across cable news. Footage of JonBenet in pageant costumes was splashed on every TV screen in America, drawing controversy over child beauty culture, while tabloids questioned whether this murder was a tragic accident or a family secret. The pressure mounted quickly, and law enforcement was feeling it too. The Boulder Police Department, unaccustomed to a case of this magnitude, was already facing scrutiny for mishandling the scene. Now they had a media storm, national FBI involvement, and a deeply influential family at the center of their investigation. While Boulder PD focused heavily on the Ramseys, the FBI reportedly pushed for a broader look, urging the local department to consider outside suspects, especially due to the unknown male DNA found at the scene. But Boulder PD had doubts. Too many things didn't sit right. One of the most bizarre and telling pieces of evidence was the ransom note. It was 2.5 pages long. It demanded exactly $118,000, the same amount as John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. It used strange language, mimicking phrases from movies like Speed and Dirty Harry. Experts noted it was likely written inside the house, using a notepad and pen belonging to Patsy. Handwriting analysis was inconclusive, though some analysts suspected Patsy may have written it. Others argued it was too uncertain to confirm. There were no fingerprints on the paper, except for Patsy's, which made sense if it was found by her, but it raised more questions than it answered. Why write such a long note for a kidnapping? Why leave it if the child was already dead? Why stay in the house for hours without waking anyone? None of it added up. As suspicion grew, the Ramseys' public actions raised even more eyebrows. They did not immediately sit down for formal police interviews. They instead hired high-powered attorneys and a PR firm. Some saw this as a sign of guilt. Others argued they were protecting themselves from a potentially corrupt or overwhelmed investigation. But Boulder PD's frustration grew. Investigators, including Detective Steve Thomas, began to believe the Ramseys were hiding something, especially Patsy. 9-year-old Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother, was quietly pulled into the background of the case. Initially, the family said he had slept through the entire night, completely unaware of anything happening. But in 1998, it was revealed that Burke had been interviewed extensively by child psychologists and police, and parts of those interviews leaked to the public. His behavior was scrutinized endlessly. At one point, he was asked about his sister's death and simply replied, "I don't know what happened. I guess someone carried her down in the basement and took her head and smashed it." A chilling response, but one that could have just been the words of a confused, traumatized child. Still, whispers grew louder. Some theorized that Burke, in a fit of childish anger, may have hit JonBenét with a flashlight. The head injury could support this. The garrote, in that theory, was then used to stage the scene and make the death look like a kidnapping. However, this theory lacked hard evidence, and the DNA on JonBenét's clothing did not match Burke either. The autopsy revealed several crucial findings. JonBenét had a skull fracture 8.5 inches long, indicative of a forceful blow. There was ligation on her wrists and neck. The garrote was fashioned from a paintbrush, broken from Patsy's own art supplies. There were signs of vaginal trauma and chronic irritation, suggesting possible prior abuse. That last detail changed everything. The possibility of ongoing abuse within the home couldn't be ignored. But there was still no confessions, no solid suspects, and nothing tying any outsider to the crime.
In 1999, a grand jury convened to review the case. After months of reviewing evidence, they voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child endangerment and obstruction, essentially accusing them of contributing to JonBenét's death, if not by action, then by covering up. But Boulder District Attorney Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment. He said the evidence simply wasn't strong enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It was a shocking decision, and one that left the case in limbo. Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer in 2006, still maintaining her innocence. But in 2008, Boulder DA Mary Lacey made a stunning announcement. New DNA analysis confirmed that the unknown male DNA on JonBenét's clothing was not a match to any Ramsey family member, including Burke. Based on this, the Ramsey family was publicly cleared of all suspicion. It was a massive twist. For years, the family had been tried in the court of public opinion. Now, suddenly, they were declared victims, not suspects. But if the Ramseys didn't do it, then who did? Fast forward to July 2025. A CBS affiliate in Denver reports that investigators are once again revisiting the case, this time with forensic genealogy technology. The same kind of DNA tracking that helped catch the Golden State Killer is now being applied to the JonBenét case. For the first time in decades, investigators believe there may be a distant relative match to the unidentified male DNA found in 1996. But as of now, no name has been released, no arrest has been made, and JonBenét's killer, if still alive, remains free.
What if the killer wasn't inside the house? What if, while the world condemned the Ramsey family, the real murderer vanished into the light? Watching the headlines unfold, untouched and unknown. Because for all the scrutiny the Ramseys received, the list of outside suspects is far longer and far darker than most people ever realized. One of the first signs that an intruder may have been involved came from the basement window. Police discovered a broken window pane, one that John Ramsey claimed he had broken himself weeks earlier after being locked out. But the window was partially open the morning of December 26, 1996, raising a chilling possibility. Could someone have entered the home through it? There was also a scuff mark on the wall beneath the window, and a piece of suitcase placed directly below, as if used to step down. Cobwebs around the grate, however, appeared undisturbed, casting doubt on whether anyone had recently passed through. Still, the theory couldn't be dismissed. If someone entered through that basement window, they would have had direct access to the room where JonBenét was later found. And that's where the focus shifted, toward people outside the Ramsey household, who may have had both the access and the motive.
Suspect number 1. Bill McReynolds.
The Christmas Santa. One of the earliest non-family suspects was Bill McReynolds, a retired journalism professor who played Santa Claus at the Ramseys' Christmas party just 5 days before JonBenét's death. Bill had an unusual obsession with children. His wife had once written a disturbing play about a child who is molested and murdered. Even more chilling, Bill's own daughter had been kidnapped in the 1970s, and he kept a vial of glitter JonBenét had given him, saying it was more precious than gold. Despite the oddities, McReynolds had an alibi, and no physical evidence ever linked him to the crime.
Suspect number 2.
Gary Olivier, a local drifter with a dark past. Perhaps the most haunting suspect is Gary Howard Olivier, a known sex offender who lived near the Ramsey residence at the time of the murder. In 2000, Oliva was arrested for drug possession, and police found a photo of JonBenét in his backpack. He also had a disturbing history. He had previously attempted to strangle his own mother with a telephone cord. Years later, in a letter sent to a former high school classmate, Oliva allegedly confessed, "I never loved anyone like I did JonBenét, and yet I let her slip and her head bashed in. It was an accident. Please believe me." The letter was turned over to the police, but no charges were filed. His DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. Yet, many still believe Oliva knows more than he's ever admitted.
Suspect number 3. Michael Helgoth, the unfinished plan. In 1997, Boulder authorities received a tip about Michael Helgoth, a 26-year-old who worked in a junkyard and allegedly had a fascination with weapons, violence, and young girls. Just days after, then DA Alex Hunter held a press conference urging JonBenét's killer to come forward, Helgoth was found dead in what was ruled a suicide. He'd been shot in the head. Next to him, a stun gun and a pair of high-tech boots. Some speculated that Helgoth had planned a kidnapping gone wrong. The theory went that JonBenét was to be abducted, but something changed. Either she fought back or the plan derailed, leading to murder. The ransom note's demand of $118,000, Helgoth's proximity to the Ramsey home and the stun gun marks on JonBenét's body all fueled suspicion. But again, no DNA match, and no hard link. The DNA mystery. What has haunted this case for years is the partial male DNA found on JonBenét's underwear and leggings. It's been tested multiple times and has never matched any known suspect, family member, or registered offender. Experts debate whether the sample is even viable. Some believe it could be transfer DNA, meaning it came from a factory worker, not the killer. But others insist it's meaningful, especially given it appeared in more than one location. In 2016, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation used the latest DNA technology to confirm that the male DNA belonged to an unknown third party, not a mixture, and was suitable for genealogical testing. That breakthrough renewed hope, but years passed with no arrest. Suspect number 4. John Mark Carr, a false confession. Perhaps the strangest twist in the case came in 2006, when a man named John Mark Carr confessed to JonBenét's murder while living in Thailand. He told authorities that he had been with JonBenét the night she died, that it was an accident, and that he had loved her. But things quickly unraveled. Carr's DNA didn't match. He had no ties to the Ramseys. His story changed repeatedly, and it soon became clear this was a fantasist, not a killer. He was never charged. As of July 2025, the most promising development is the genealogical DNA tracing that has been underway for nearly a year. Sources close to the Boulder Police Department have hinted that a partial familial match has been found, meaning someone in the killer's family tree may finally be traceable. If true, it could mean the case is nearing its long-awaited breakthrough. But official statements remain cautious. She never got to grow up, never had her first heartbreak, never went to high school, never danced at prom. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old. She was supposed to be safe in her bed on Christmas night, but instead, her name became one of the most haunting questions America has ever asked. From the moment news broke of JonBenét's murder, the case became a media circus. It wasn't just the horror of the crime, it was the imagery. A blonde, blue-eyed child in pageant dresses, captured in tiaras and makeup, turned into symbols on tabloid covers. The press descended on Boulder. Paparazzi camped outside the Ramsey home. Reporters hounded police officers, friends, teachers, even distant relatives. And amid that storm, the line between news and entertainment began to blur. Talk shows speculated nightly, tabloids screamed mother did it one day and father killed her. The next no one was spared, not even JonBenét herself, as her photos were dissected in grotesque headlines for clicks and sales. No matter what one believes about the Ramsey family, one thing is certain. They lost a child in the most brutal, public way possible, and then became the suspects in her murder. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, became the focal point of public rage. She was accused of forcing her daughter into pageants, of faking the ransom note, of covering up a fatal accident. She always denied involvement. She never stopped fighting to clear her name. But she died in 2006 from ovarian cancer, her daughter's murder still unsolved, her name never fully cleared in the public eye. John Ramsey, the father, retreated from public life for years. He remarried. Occasionally he gives interviews,
but his face still tightens when JonBenét's name is spoken. In many ways, his life ended that day in 1996 too. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother, was only 9 when she died. For decades, he stayed silent. Then, in 2016, he appeared in a televised interview with Dr. Phil, denying any involvement and expressing the trauma he'd endured.
He later filed a $750 million defamation lawsuit against CBS for a documentary that insinuated he killed JonBenét, a case eventually settled out of court. The tragedy of JonBenét's murder wasn't just the crime, it was how her death was consumed. She became a true crime icon, her name endlessly recycled on YouTube, Netflix, podcasts, blogs. But in the process, the real little girl often got lost. She loved dancing and Christmas. She had a favorite pink bicycle. Her teachers said she was gentle, sweet, curious. She had no idea her face would one day symbolize America's darkest question. Her parents didn't just lose her, they lost their privacy, their reputations, their peace. The truth is, whether they were guilty or innocent, they suffered a public crucifixion that no other grieving family has endured on such a scale. As of now, the JonBenét Ramsey case remains unsolved. No one has ever been arrested, no one has been officially cleared. The Boulder Police Department claims the investigation is still active, though critics say progress has stalled for years. In 2022, Colorado Governor Jared Polis encouraged agencies to outsource testing to independent DNA experts, and in 2023, efforts to analyze JonBenét's DNA using advanced familial genealogy began. As of mid-2025, sources close to the investigation confirmed that a partial familial link was discovered. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey changed how America views crime, media, and justice. It exposed the flaws in small-town policing. It revealed how quickly the public can turn on grieving families. It showed how a crime scene can be botched, how leads can go cold, and how cases can fall apart under pressure. But it also forced us to reckon with something deeper, how easily a child can be lost not just in life, but in narrative. The internet made JonBenét immortal, but it also made her a spectacle, and through all the headlines, theories, books and documentaries, one question still floats above everything. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey?
Maybe we'll find out. Maybe the new DNA technology will lead to an arrest. Maybe the killer is long dead. Or maybe they're still watching the news 29 years later, waiting to see if they'll ever be caught. JonBenét deserves justice, not just in a courtroom, but in memory, in truth, in peace. We owe her more than a mystery. We owe her an answer. She was only 6. She should have been safe in her home, curled up under twinkling lights, dreaming of toys and Christmas morning. Instead, she became a question mark the world never stopped asking. Who silenced JonBenét Ramsey? And why has that silence lasted this long? What do you believe happened to JonBenét Ramsey? Do you think the killer was inside the house that night? Or do you believe someone out there has gotten away with murder for nearly 3 decades? Let us know in the comments. Your voice matters.